Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojú ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀.
Welcome, everyone, to Theoryforge Chronicles, Episode 9, Amphibia and Insecta. I am Phantomex, of course, joined by Diggs, Legendary Neurotoxin. Sog could not join us this week, but we have a special guest, Baldrin Hammerfirst. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Doing great.
Doing good.
So we, there was a live show that we're going to kind of get into, and I'll actually, Neuro had taken sort of a lot of notes. So I'll post our Discord's actually down there. You can just join us, look under general, and there's a pretty good highlight. But before we get into that, Baldrin, I don't know if you wanted to just sort of introduce yourself, kind of tell everyone what your role in the community is.
I go by, in the community, Goat Lord Baldrin Hammerfirst. I'm a Mayor Pledge, and I'm in the Kingdom of Vornair.
Awesome. And I know you were mentioning this is sort of also right kind of down your alley, something you're really interested in. So hopefully we're going to have a good discussion.
Definitely.
Neuro, you got to watch the whole thing and took a recap. Yep. So I think we'll just start with you.
Even ask a couple questions. Yeah. So the episode was featuring Snipe Hunter and Suzu, who is doing a lot of the environmental design and tech-related stuff. And it was really, really good, concentrated 1 hour of going through questions, giving satisfying answers, and really helping us kind of understand not only where the direction of things is, but how far along they already are. So that was quite a good subject for them to cover, and I'm really glad that we were able to get so much information. They covered 30 questions off of a list, plus some additional questions, and I did my best to write them down as I was going, though I didn't go back through it and clarify on a few different things that I may have missed. But one of the first things that they had talked about, the first question was actually about whether or not we'd be able to capture animals. And yes, we will be able to capture animals. There's a lot of various implications for how to do that, and size and scale, and things that are at a level of impossibility. So, I mean, I think that's a good place to start. We knew that there was going to be some amount of dealing with animals, animal husbandry, animal taming, milking cows, and working with bees and all that sort of stuff. So I'm glad that it's something that they addressed early on. That it was, I think, the highest voted question, so they just went for it first, because that does kind of clarify for a lot of people like what you'll actually be able to do if people are into the whole. Whether it's being like a monster tamer or like a Pokemon gotta catch 'em all sort of mentality, or we've heard about projects like the Private Royal Reserve or whatever of like a
Polite.
Yeah, Polite's project to basically have his own little like Noah's Ark of things just kind of on the property, and so if populations diminish, he's got the means to replenish them. So that stuff is really cool, and the fact that the systems are going to be pretty robust for it are also pretty cool. Knocking out an animal might not necessarily be needed. Hog tying it, putting it in a cage, it depends on the kind of animal. Some things are going to be too big. The example they gave was trying to put a kraken in a wagon with a cage on it, and that's not really going to work. I'd imagine you're not going to be able to get much response out of a kraken trying to do any sort of domestication to begin with, or taming or capture or anything but trying to run for your life, really.
Baldrin, I have a question. You seemed really excited for this topic. Were you specifically or What was this a topic that you were specifically interested in?
The reason I'm so interested in this because I really wanted to know a little more about the breeding mechanics and the genetics and stuff like that because in my town I want to start a breeding program for goats so the Harathi can ride them.
Oh, riding them! I thought you were going to do like the fainting goats to protect the flock. I mean, there is a need for those too, but that was one of the things that I thought was really nice they addressed. I've got a response about it somewhere here, but basically, breeding will definitely be a thing. The way it kind of sounded to me is like Mendelian inheritance, but with some extra modifiers to make things more fun and interesting.
Yeah.
So not quite like real world genetics. Obviously, that's something we don't even understand enough in the real world to be able to, gamify in such a way. But, kind of taking the broad strokes and blending them in a way that makes sense. And one of the things that he mentioned is that crossbreeding things, it's not always a positive. You can get genetic traits that are poor. You can end up making something that's worse than the stock that you started from. So I think that's interesting, especially the idea that it can happen across multiple generations, that you didn't know that, crossing this with this in 3 generations was going to cause something where, it turns out with, male and female parts, and then it's just a big seedy mess or whatever.
There should be some, if they do it well, there should be some way for us to track that. That's what humans do. In Wizard 101, I was the Darwin of the breeding system. So I came up with the pet gnome project, and I was the one who figured out the methodology of getting the traits that you wanted, and the systematically of getting the traits that you wanted in your pets through breeding.
It shouldn't be that complicated, though, right? I mean, you want a taller animal, so you breed the taller ones. You want something that produces more milk, so you measure per animal which one is produced. But like you said, it's how well is that translated to us that we can see what we're doing.
And you have to look out for the side effects too. Like we have the ability to breed animals with they don't really regulate their hypertrophy. So you've got these animals that are just bounded with muscle, but apparently they can't really move much because everything just kind of breaks if they try to. So
it's Saint Bernards, and
I saw a cow or a bull or whatever that was it looked beefy, ripped, but it turns out no, it's basically disabled with the amount of muscle that it has versus bone density and all of that sort of stuff. So I could definitely see, things like that. But then at the same time, the ability, we went from whatever cows were, a few hundred years ago to this, A5 Wagyu or whatever, which is like the most amazing beef. I've had it. It's pretty damn good.
But just all the dog strains that we have that are, messed up.
Yeah, exactly.
We got
dogs
them to look
and
the way we
cats
wanted, but they're sick as crap.
Well, here's a question.
Yes.
So since we're talking about it, I'm trying to remember the name of the game. Oh, Scum. I don't know if anybody saw this on Twitter. I follow a lot of gaming people. But anyways, it's like a survival MMO. But it was nuts because you opened up the character screen and there was literally like 100+ different things that you could look at. Like, I forget everything, like electrolytes and body fat and hydration. So the question is, like, how detailed would you want this to be? How detailed do we want it to be if we're trying to actually crossbreed? Because you could make the argument that would actually be very important.
I think what this goes back to the whole verisimilitude over veracity, that we want something that feels like the thing but isn't as detailed, requires as much like real world knowledge to be able to perform and execute, plus or minus making little exceptions for the existence of magic and other supernatural forces. So it's
of course my whole concern about the game is that it will be so overcomplicated that it's not fun.
Yeah.
So that's the balance that you have to make.
Yeah, it's a fun sort of thing, but it's gotta remain fun for people on all different levels. If I'm not as great about like tracking information and stuff, sure, I might be able to have some success with genetics and breeding and stuff, but the idea that like you can give people the tools and give people the knowledge that they can people can work together when the big what's it called thing comes every year and everybody kind of meets together, the ability to not only share stock that they've bred over the past year, the IRL year, not in-game year, that they'll be able to not only share techniques, share stock, and all that sort of stuff. That's actually really, really intriguing to me, because it means somebody who isn't actually very good at this stuff but wants to, get good stuff can, piggyback off of the people that actually know their stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, throw a few gold ahead my way and I'll get you some of my livestock that's like, sure to improve your farm. Go ahead.
I just it's interesting to me because when I saw Scum, I was like, this is crazy. Who would want to do this? Of course, that's in the context of a survival game. The more I think about this, because this is, again, what I would like to do within this game is have a farm and cross-pollinate plants and, work with animals. I actually think that would be advantageous to have that much information available to know what you're doing. I would almost rather have that than spend the time blindly trying to figure it out. Baldrin, I don't know how you think, because you're very interested in this as well, animal husbandry. I don't know, like, would you want more details, less details? I
would like to have a system similar to like Ark a little bit, where each creature kind of had a certain amount of stamina or a certain amount of health, like naturally, and then you could selectively pick those and breed them and get it like a desired outcome. I think that would be like the best. Not necessarily like over complicated like something like Scum, but more like Ark, because Ark had a pretty good breeding system, I thought.
Yeah. I'm waiting to see how long the awkward pause lasts.
I was gonna say, for me, I'm wondering exactly what the level of complexity and detail and stuff is that's going to go into it. How much of it is going to be purely physical characteristics versus how much will be like behavioral things that you'll be able to have things that you've bred to act a different way, be more docile, be more aggressive, etc. That we're really able to control all the different aspects of it, from like the color, the density of the fur of an animal, to like the shape and size of its like snout and face parts and such. That's really cool. The idea that different servers will have different looking cats and dogs and pigs and wolves and otter bears and stuff. That's awesome to me. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, but the other problem of getting over complicated is ending up with vaporware like Landmark and Story Bricks.
Unfortunately, they aren't relying on a third party for it. Suzu sounds like he's working on this stuff directly. In fact, he was giving the example about the flower cup porcupine. He put them in the world. He was trying to find them, and he could not find them. It's like, I'm sure I put them in. So finally he cheats. He raises one up so that he can find it. And when he goes over, sure enough, it's in a flower patch. They're already behaving as they're supposed to. The flower cup porcupine hides in flower patches. So they were all congregated in the various flower patches. That, to me, says a little bit more than, the vaporware level of Landmark. It sounds like they've actually got the systems working integrated in engine, which is a lot more exciting to me than the story.
I'm still saying if you get too complicated, that means that you're never going to get the game out. So I'm just saying that's the other danger of not only going into physical traits, but going into detail of AI behavior.
Yeah.
And in addition to going into minutia about snout length and all that stuff.
Well, we'll
you
see.
can work on all that for years.
Honestly, you could just have like 20 blend shapes for each of the different body parts of an animal, and genetic variation is the ability to get expression of those different shapes. Looking at it from like a technical 3D modeling standpoint, sure, it's a lot of work, but when it's executed right, it works well. It's real easy. But we'll see what they do and how complex they make it, for sure.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned behavior, and Diggs, you mentioned Storybricks, because one of the things on your list was that more intelligent creatures will demonstrate more advanced behaviors, which would indicate some level of advanced AI, which I mean, I'd be happy to see that. That kind of caught me a little off guard, because I was sort of envisioning this as more of a player-driven. I guess in my head, when you have much more of a player-driven game, you don't necessarily have to worry as much.
Well, I think about it more as like giving creatures additional tools to solve puzzles. Like one of the examples they gave was crows dropping rocks in a volume of water that's too low for them to drink, so they displace the water up and they can drink it. Or another example they gave, I guess, was apparently crows also will grab bottle caps and snowboard down snowy rooftops. They can have fun. They're intelligent enough that they can survive, but they can also have fun. That's a different set of tools than an ant. An ant is a lot more like responding to its chemicals, signals, and stimuli around it in very like precise programmed ways. I would say they're a lot more predictable.
Well, I only mention that because it seems like, again, mentioning Landmark, the more you get into deep involved AI, the more it seems things just don't get produced. So that's all.
That's just a fine line. We don't know what the line is. I'm just saying that's, as you say, super complicated physicality and super complicated AI.
I don't know how
complicated.
Yeah,
difficult.
I have no idea how complex things are actually going to be. That was not the level of detail and complexity, I believe, was intentionally not expressed at all during the stream.
Yeah.
I don't think they want to really say immediately exactly how much is going to go into the things. And I think one of the other nice things about that is a game with a 10-year plan, the idea that the systems can improve post-launch and be something that with the initial servers kind of happens invisibly and is like an evolutionary sort of thing. But then servers they release later on will be able to have that technology built in from the beginning.
Yeah, put in hooks so that you can develop it over time later. That's good. That's a good plan.
Yeah, and it's definitely something, again, if they just give like 2 versions of body shapes and stuff with the idea that you can modularly expand infinitely, that already sets the table for future expansion, future content, future additions to the breeding system that we start with, both for plants and for animals. Baldrin, you're smiling over there. What you got to say?
I was laughing at your camera. But
what's my camera doing?
It's doing some crazy stuff on my screen.
So, Baldrin, what? You're hoping to breed goats, but what are you hoping to breed your goats to do? So, what traits would you like to breed into your goats if you could?
Oh, I want goats for meat, milk, but I mainly want to breed them for military use. So I want to build basically goat cavalry, so I can fight people with those. I think that'd be really neat.
So, or do you think you need to build goats that are big enough to ride? So you think you're going to have to start trying to work to get them to the proper size at the very least?
Yeah. Well, we already know that the goats are actually the Harathi's main animal that they use already. So as far as we know, I mean, I guess you could go ahead and say that they probably already ride them. But I think, I agree. I think that in order to actually like take them into battle, they'd probably need to be pretty big. So
Yeah.
Okay. And so you specifically want to use them for Harafi. You don't necessarily care about trading them to other people's.
Well, yeah. I actually have talked to a couple people about possibly trading them. I don't really know if I want to trade the battle goats, but I'll trade them.
Well, I mean, to other tribes. So, right, they'd have to be the right size for other tribes as well.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't necessarily care about that.
No, my county's pretty. We're actually like a solid Harathi county. So,
which is nice to hear, because I have not other people who've come on and just said everybody.
Yeah. We're mainly Harathi in my county. So.
Nice. And then, so do you think that you would have? Do you think that you would diversify in terms of, what makes a good battle goat might not make a good meat or milk goat? So
exactly.
do you envision having?
They'll probably look pretty different.
Paths?
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely. I want to put a lot of breeding infrastructure in to help get that thing going. I want to take in all the farmers, get everybody in there so we can start that stuff up right in the beginning.
There you go.
Have we heard about different benefits from food?
They did talk about being able to have like a better potato, for example. So I don't know exactly the context of what a better potato is. If it grows faster, if it grows larger, requires less resources, if it's able to survive in harsher environment, more resistant to various different ailments that could afflict it, that sort of stuff. I think there's a lot of potential considerations, and I think it also kind of might depend on like where you are and what you're trying to do. If you're trying to grow potatoes in an area that doesn't necessarily have them as frequently as like an additional commodity for the locals, or because it's something that everybody eats, like garlic and onions in the real world, everybody around the world eats them. So if you're in an area that doesn't have them, it would make sense to be able to grow any of them that you can, even if they're not optimal, the ones that are going to be able to survive in that environment, so you can infuse onions into the local infrastructure. That totally makes sense. But likewise, if you're in an area where they grow well, then grow the best ones you possibly can. You've got fields and fields of space.
Well, I mean, have we heard that like good quality potato or good quality goat meat will increase your stamina, or your stamina will last longer, your hunger will... I don't believe
they've given any specifics on the correlation between the quality of the food and its preparation and its actual results. For all we know...
effects on the person is what, or the character is what I'm wondering. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I love the idea of being able to just experiment with all these things. I think that's the coolest thing about all this. Like I remember Steipenner talking about how if you take a flower or something that grows in the tropics and you try to take it to somewhere where it's cold, it will die. Well, what if you take that tropical flower and you move it to a geothermal like pool or something? Will it still survive? I don't know. I just think it's cool that I was that kid when I was younger. I'd play Zoo Tycoon and take the animals and make them fight each other and do all that stuff.
Because I'm old, so when I think of what we were able to do as kids, I'm thinking of, we would have to do that with real animals. So I was like, what? You did what? I forget. You guys got to do that virtually if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Well, and that's something I'm curious about too, because how much they mimic sort of real life with all this. Because, this year I spent, I'm learning still, but having a fairly large garden. So, and the reality is there are obviously things that only grow in certain areas, but there's quite a bit of overlap. So how restrictive they're going to be is kind of interesting to me. And then other things too, like if you have, again, we get into breeding. So say there's a root vegetable or something that grows, over 68 days within whatever. And the further you go north, you don't have that much time. So can you breed it? So like in the real world, you have certain types of potatoes that will take 80 days to mature, but you have other ones that will in 40 days. So will you be able to change so that, yeah, you go down somewhere, you get some exotic vegetables or fruit or whatever, and like you said, Baldrin, you take it and you try to kind of acclimate it over time.
Yeah, experiment with it.
Like, will you be able to somehow modify it enough that, yeah, you can take that orange now and go a little bit more north with it? And then also, how long will that take? That's the other thing when I read, well, we'll be able to, cross-pollinate and change things. How quickly will that happen within the terms of the game? Because, my thought there is it shouldn't be all, within, say, like a week. Hey, I've developed a brand new vegetable here. It really, to me anyway, should take some sort. Now, I'm not saying it should take, dozens of years like it would in real life, but it's just interesting where the balance will be.
Yeah. I think in the video or in the Q&A they talked about being able to like cross pollinate or like make hybrids like plum apricots or whatever they were called, where it was like apricot and plum or something like that. So you could do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they did talk about being able to make hybrid plants. Definitely sounds like it's something that won't be easy to do. And they especially said once one exists, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're going to be populated in the world. You have to put forth effort if you want them to be populated in the world.
The other thing that Phantom ran into in the real world this spring and summer was watermelons and squash. And was it watermelons and squash? What ended up overrunning the
lettuce was the other one?
That damn groundhog ate all my watermelon is what happened.
Oh no.
But I mean,
they've been captured and either killed or let go very far away from here now. But
I mean, in terms of just making sure that doesn't overrun the other ones and stuff like that.
Well, that too, yeah. Actually preparing land, how spacing and just how close things need to be together. I don't know that I'd want it to see that much detail, like that much time spent in trying to figure out. Yeah, this one needs 6 meters of space. I don't know, but yes, that is a problem.
Well, there will be like farming skills and stuff to help players along the way. It won't just be going with real world knowledge of things.
What?
So if you plant watermelons in the wrong spot, you'll wake up and they'll just move themselves over a little bit so that they don't ever run.
I think it's more like I think of the interface for trying to plant landmines in PlanetSide, where if you're just too close, it says you're too close to the nearest deployable. And once you're out of range, the reticle shows, green. You can put it down.
Well, just show up and say, "Are you sure?"
Yeah. Well, and did you mention like plant diseases too? Would there be diseases? You mentioned like in the animals, but what about plants? Because that's also another.
Yeah.
Again, it's just how detailed do you want to make farming?
I believe there will be not only diseases in terms of like a potato smut famine sort of thing, but also like genetic diseases, like you've bred them in such a way that they produce a product that always like bursts in the seams or whatever right when it gets ripe or whatever, and then nobody wants it.
Well, because it can be the other way. So like tomato plants, something I ran into is it's called southern blight, which is basically a fungus. But there are certain breeds that have been bred to be resistant. So is that, again, another option within breeding?
It says there's inheritance with mutations. So mutation indicates that there could be bad mutations and good mutations.
That worries me a little bit too, because that introduces necessarily randomness. So,
I think you should expect certain.
Because the mutation is random. Breeding, you're not breeding for a mutation. You're breeding for a characteristic that already exists.
That's right.
Right, and then when a mutation occurs, you have to either let it happen or try to exploit it or whatever. I mean, that's kind of an interesting sort of thing.
Little kind of strange phrasing, because you do breed in order to take advantage of mutations. So I'm expecting that to happen, as mutations will happen, and then you'll have to adjust.
I guess this is my Care Bear. I don't want to spend time and only to have it all die with.
Yeah, hopefully it won't be that bad. Yeah.
I'm interested to see if if someone will transport a crop from one part of the world to the other that isn't in the area, and it might end up becoming an invasive species instead of a crop and taking over.
That's what I want to do to Polite's sanctuary. I want to be a dross and go in and introduce.
Well, no, that's very interesting.
They did actually specifically mention kudzu vine being brought to America. So
that's super interesting, right? Because that would be a whole completely different form of warfare.
Right.
Like, I think the big thing around here are some sort of Asian wasps or something that are killing all of the honeybees, again, in the real world, if you want to mimic real world. So could you go to another area that relies on honey or something and actually sabotage that? And would they even know you did it?
Yeah,
well, I guess if I'm introducing animals that have disease and plague, they might.
But if my point being, if you come in with a army, they're going to obviously see who you are. If you just let a random animal run loose,
bullfrogs in Australia,
they won't know until the sanctuary is destroyed. All of them are
that's a super interesting
with
question.
The plague.
I'm very curious about this now. That is a very
and.
I believe using invasive species in that way is definitely something that they talked about. Things being brought over because of aesthetics, like, we like these cats. We're going to bring them on our ship because they look funny on ships. And then, now we've got them in this new place. Great. It didn't have cats before. Now they're a blight on this entire new place. Or tumbleweeds. That's one of the things I laugh about with Wild West movies is tumbleweeds weren't as prevalent. They had just barely started coming over at that point. It's in the modern era that we've got tumbleweeds everywhere.
Bamboo.
Bamboo, yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's plenty of examples in the real world of neighbors getting pissed off at their at each other, and someone planting bamboo so that it goes underneath their house and grows up through the roof.
Do tumbleweeds actually exist outside of Western movies and TV?
They came from Europe.
I never hear anything about them except for in movies and TV.
Yeah, well.
Are they still? I don't know. I'm asking. Are they still around? I haven't heard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I hit one with a car just last year. We always get tumbleweeds every year.
I'm interested to see what kind of repercussions stuff like that would have in the ecosystems in the game. They talked about how there's, primary consumer, secondary consumer. There's all these levels. Like what happens when you take an animal from another area and you put it in and it has to compete with another animal, for food. They talked about how messing with the ecosystem like that, killing off all the prey animals, you could increase the number of attacks on other players or villages because the animals will seek out food. I don't know. I think it's really interesting. It's really cool.
Yeah.
That's just this. I'm glad you mentioned the idea. I've never even thought of this because we've talked about overhunting, right? And they mentioned that, and we mentioned the what's his name? The video, the Ultima online video.
Yeah, Ultima Online. Yeah.
Lord British, where he's talking about how players just decimated everything and they didn't expect it, but.
I don't know why they didn't expect it.
But it's the same.
I like the idea of giving like wildcats secondary consumer. So if all the rats are destroyed, like rats are the primary prey, and if there are no rats, humans are the primary prey.
And could you breed wolves? You mentioned your goats for war purposes. Could you breed attack animals, in a way that you just let them go on a countryside and they just go decimate everything they can find?
Yeah, see, that's why I brought that up, because that's one of my real concerns is what happens to my goats when people start hunting all the other prey. Their wolves are going to come from my animals at that point. They're going to come from me.
Yeah, what happens when you abandon your dogs and they become feral?
That's the thing. They actually said, if it's domesticated, there's also a high likelihood that a dog would actually starve because it's only going to eat when food is presented to it because it's been made loyal. So there are some animals that will more likely revert to a feral nature. Like I think they said lizards, reptiles would have a higher chance of that. But mammals, it seems like they might actually just kind of stick around and wait for the next meal.
Yeah.
Huh. Don't dogs become feral when you leave them around?
Well,
not all of them.
I mean, I've never heard of dogs. It seems like they pack up and start hunting stuff if you leave them alone. They don't stop eating.
I could see that maybe if you fed it like a kibble or something that it couldn't get like out in the wilderness, but if you fed it just raw meat, then it might go and scavenge or do whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And again, we're talking about like a wolf versus a dog. A wolf would not, if you somehow manage to domesticate a wolf, they act completely differently. I had a buddy who had a wolf. Yeah. He talked about it. It'll like walk around the house one time, then sniff your hand, let you know everything's fine, then walk around the house again. And it just keeps doing patrols and checking on things. He said that there's this thing that's like procedure they had to do once a month where they had the wolf lay on its back, and everybody, not in like a strangling manner, but to put their hands around its neck gently to indicate that it was the lowest. Yeah, it was the bottom of the chain, because if at any point it thinks it's not at the bottom of the chain, it will start to try to fight to build its way up, and that's when people start getting bit. So, in that case, if you have a wolf that you stop feeding, it's going to go feral again.
But I assume you're able to retrain them, though, like mentioned in cats go throughout the week. So I think
they said if it goes feral, it's going to be real hard to retrain it. I think it's going to be like a negative modifier sort of thing.
Yeah, kill it, get a new one.
Yeah. Turn it into a coat.
That's the answer for everything. Just kill it and get
it's
a new
just
one.
Digits.
Well, that's exciting. I never even really thought of that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
How many episodes are we going to devote to this? We've got 30 questions and we're on 4, right?
I mean, we've been jumping
we're on
around.
Number 2.
We've been jumping around across.
You want to talk
list.
about sharks? I mean, we can talk about sharks.
They're confirmed.
Yeah.
As they said, well, what are you going to have people walk off the plank into?
Whales.
Deep water.
Whales. I don't think I want to be close enough to a kraken to have somebody jump off into its maw. If you're that close, it's already too late.
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about this was sort of interesting too. Again, just how much resource do they invest into each of these parts? But there was a mention, I think, of altitude somehow affecting things.
Yeah, so that was my question.
Wind, right? Wind was another.
Those are two separate things. So wind, I'll talk about real quick because they only said a little bit. It was basically we aren't necessarily going to track it as wind for wind's sake. We're going to track high and low systems of air pressure, and this may cause wind.
Yeah.
They haven't confirmed whether they're going to actually use wind, but if they are, it's going to be driven by pressure systems.
Did they say what the purpose was? Like, why have wind? Because, I mean, there could be a lot of different reasons.
It pushes the weather systems around the map, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And it
weather.
makes us change clothes throughout the day.
Well, I mean,
pushes. I would imagine on top of all of that, actually having wind would matter for either pollination or if you're hunting and you don't want to be upwind of something so it catches a whiff, it either, charges you or retreats or whatever it's going to do. I don't know if that's the level of complexity they would be planning for it, but thinking of what I would use wind for in a game like this, that sort of stuff makes sense.
I think they talked about the wind having something to do. Say there was like a mountain and they said something about like rain shadows and how the rain shadows can affect what type of plants grow in a certain area because those areas get rain and others don't. And
yeah, that was regarding my question about whether or not like the north or south, east, west faces of a mountain would have differential plant life based on, exposure to light and exposure to rain and that sort of stuff. So it sounds like yes, and it sounds like everything's going to be based on the size of plots. So I had thought initially, maybe I think it's every 50 or 100 meters in real world is about where the altitude markers where things start appearing or disappearing in the environment would be. But no, they said it's specifically going to be based on the size of plots, whatever that size is going to be, which I'm sure is going to be, plenty adequate to give the variation across a large altitude.
Well, no, it's just, I mean, it makes sense with scent and things like that. I was also curious about, like, again, since this is sort of in a flora fauna, damage to crops and things like that, if it's actually that level of complexity. So, you have a storm come through and half your tomato plants are blown over. So.
Gosh, I hate that.
Or as in chat, drunken kite flying.
Yeah. The thing that I'm also interested in is how that's all going to play out in terms of, it sounds like there aren't, I feel like I asked Snipe about this months ago or whatever, the idea of there being kind of transitory, transitionary sort of biomes, ones that it's not 100% forest and then 100% desert, like the map for like an old 2D, RPG or whatever for Nintendo. It's very much like the elements of the desert where those things can grow will continue as far along towards that transition to the forest as they will. Likewise, anything from the forest that's sturdy enough that can kind of make its way into like all but the most extreme parts of the desert, both plants and animals will be seeing doing that. And it's going to be basically, if the conditions fit for it to exist there, it can exist there. It doesn't mean it has to, but it has the opportunity.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I always point this out when we go on vacation because I live in Tennessee, and so when we're driving through Georgia, heading down into Florida, you'll notice that you'll start to see more and more of those palmettos. And so eventually it'll just be like, it'll go from like, hardwoods to slowly transition to pine forest and palmetto trees. So I think that'll be neat to see in game. The biome will slowly transition.
Yeah, that's something I'm always excited to see in any game ever. So the fact that it's going to be in something, of this scale, I feel is actually going to be really, really worthwhile to the overall experience, and honestly could very well be a kind of a foundational piece for MMOs and games going forward in terms of just how to approach it and how to really maximize using your environment and your resources to make a diverse and interesting world out of it with all the environments.
Yep, I think that'd be really neat.
Simon, go ahead. Sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just curious. The other thing, again, with breeding and everything like that, I think they said a couple of hundred. Is that what they said? I think I saw you wrote hundreds, not thousands of different types. So,
yeah.
So will we be able to create and name our own type, or would that get too complicated? Because then you would be maybe talking about different,
looks and... That's a really good question. I'm not sure.
Because eventually, what the
labeling is going to be.
You will create a new species. So.
Yeah, I feel like there has to be some sort of labeling that's going to be, whether it's something on the item name, grown by so-and-so, or if it's going to be almost like, I think of things like EVE Online or whatever, you might have something that you're trading that just says like, snacks or whatever, and it's up to you to try to role play to the person. Oh, these are these fancy snacks that come from this station or whatever. In a game like that, it wouldn't necessarily matter because there aren't any additional attributes to those items. They're just commodities. But here, I definitely see something where if you grow something that is of a higher quality and it only comes up saying onions, then it's up to you to say, these are my onions. These are Neuro's classic, punch you in the face onions. Be very, very, very careful with them.
That was the man-eating question. That was the answer to the man-eating plants question.
What?
Which one?
He's saying be careful of the onions, and I'm asking, is that the answer?
No, I just want to make real spicy onions.
Man-eating onions.
Man-eating onions.
No, we were talking about if you breed enough.
I know. I'm just.
Yeah, but
they said unknown to the answer. Manny
so that was basically when Suzu was asked, he just kind of glared at the camera. So we don't know. Like, was that a, of course there are, who do you think I am, or was it, what the hell do you think this is? Like, we're not going to have Seymour up in here.
I think
not Seymour.
Seymour.
Audrey.
Didn't they say that before we leave the first continent, there could possibly be hundreds of plant species and stuff that we discovered, but when we add the second 2 continents, it would possibly be over 1,000? Didn't they say that?
That might have been what they said. It sounds like initially there will be hundreds of variations of plant and animal life, though. So, we'll see. Again, that could also be something that we don't know, depending on how well the game does, resources they can commit to adding more variations and stuff, etc.
Yeah, that's crazy, though, because the map is so big, and I think it only accounts for like 25% or something. So add another 2 continents on there. That's a crazy amount of stuff.
Yeah, plus ocean flora and fauna they talked about. You're not going to be able to tame fish. Yeah. Otter bears are probably the only aquatic thing or amphibious sort of thing that, I guess they're mammals or whatever, but that you're the water-going thing that you're going to be able to do any breeding and taming and stuff with. So, but there's going to be fishing. There's going to be all sorts of stuff that fishing cultures would find and use. So I'd imagine crustaceans and, there's likely going to be, insects and worms and stuff like that you would want to use as bait. That's all like really cool stuff.
And they also said that different parts of plants will be useful for different things. I mean, it's not going to be super extensive, but probably
different
a handful
parts
or
of plants,
so. Different
plants. They said there's 4 different processes you can do on any given thing, like a flower, or I guess like a piece of meat or a potato or whatever, in terms of like processing it for some sort of alchemic purpose. And it sounds kind of like the order in which you apply them will determine what the resulting outcome will be.
Yeah, like grinding a plant's leaves up and making some sort of tea or something like that.
Yeah, or just that some plants might be used as the base for something. Like all plants have some amount of latex in them. Some things produce a lot more than others. So I could see like a rubber tree, for example, being produced for chemical purposes.
Yeah, I could see that being cool.
That white gooey stuff when you get a plant open.
So we had a question that Immaculate Deception in chat had answered. Had asked about the dross and breeding insects that got answered, I think, and kind of mentioned insect breeding might be a thing.
Yeah, They specifically bees and silkworms were going to be something to breed.
And that there might be dog-sized insects.
Yeah, that there might be some bigger things. I don't know, like what that might entail. Large beetle-y things or
coconut spiders.
Coconut spiders. Those are hilarious.
And I guess he asked if let's see, gigantic insects that would make you question how much oxygen is in the world. Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see if there will be any. They didn't say they said there won't be any gliding animals, but they didn't, or flying animals, but they didn't say anything about gliding animals.
In terms of what you can tame.
Yeah,
right.
They said you could tame. Nothing mountable, nothing mount-sized for sure. But they did say that falcons and carrier pigeons were definitely things that they were looking at having. So you won't be able to ride a griffin or whatever, but
I wonder if they'll nothing that can have any sustained flight, but like something like a I don't know if you guys have played Ark, but there's something in there called a rock drake, and it's basically a big lizard, and it jumps and it just kind of glides down, and eventually it'll just land on the ground. Yeah.
That could be interesting, but I could see how that could smell way too much like other MMOs, and people might not want to.
We won't need to care about that once we discover gliders. So we just have to discover that tech. Yeah, what was the other thing about large insects? It was, he was asking whether or not that would count as animal husbandry, the larger ones. And I'm not sure if he says in chat whether or not they answered that.
Yeah, I don't remember if they said, if you're right, because if animal husbandry itself is the overall all-encompassing everything that has to do with breeding and managing animals whatsoever, then yeah, it would definitely fall in that category. But I could see it also being something where that's the overarching, like, all-encompassing, but then there's different levels of breakdown and specificity to that, where breeding fish, breeding insects, breeding plants, breeding fungi, breeding animals, all are going to be their own aspect of that total, overarching skill set.
Will insects be edible?
Sure.
Will insects be edibles? Can they be?
Well, if you're breeding them, yeah.
I don't see why not.
We're gonna have edibles in the game.
Oh, those kind, yeah.
I'm sure the Torres can come up with something.
We are going to have mushrooms and mushroom wine starter kits and stuff. They are available on the store for $20, just about enough for some real world mushrooms. But no, I'm not going to encourage people to do that, except maybe in the game you want to. I'm probably going to. I think it's hilarious, the idea that you can trip out and go on the spirit plane as an animal for a period of time. I might just start a farm where I'm just doing that and just tripping balls. Like, screw the whole, like, adventuring around and being a historian. I'm just going to be like some sort of, vision questy person.
Yeah, Nero, the historian oracle.
No, I'll just call it Nero's playground. He was paid.
That's what they're going to call the astral plane.
What, Neuroland?
Yeah, Nero's playground.
Well,
$50, all you can eat.
Yep.
If you pass out and we rob you, that's your own fault. That's how you.
I don't recommend coming with money or anything that you care about. It's a spirit quest. Come on.
Well, 16 says some flora may cause visual effects, but this may be intoxication related.
Yeah.
So there might be edibles.
Oh yeah, no, definitely there will be.
I think it's mentioned in maybe the Torres write-up. One of the tribes, they grow some sort of it's like drugs or something, like some sort of drug plant that they can manufacture. I'm pretty sure it's the Torres. I'm not sure though. Okay. So definitely stuff like that in the game.
The only other thing I'm sort of interested in from what was up there. Oh, I will also point out, we had talked about, I think you had mentioned watermelon. I didn't realize there was a section they talked about you could not train the shape of plants. I don't know, again, overgrowth, how that will work. But.
Well, that's like hedges, or if you've got hops that you want to grow through a trellis or something.
But they mentioned it's resource intensive, right? So I assume that would also apply to directing vines where to grow and things like that.
System resource intensive. I should have specified. It's technical system resource intensive to have plants that can shape and grow and conform to different things. That's what I meant. Not that it would cost you 10 times more soil to make a tree that grows this way instead of a tree that grows this way.
I like this in 15 that says some creatures can't be tamed and will always escape if you let them. That could be fun to experiment with, see which ones will do that and which ones won't.
Yeah, I think there was a larger predatory lizard that they had mentioned that would just, if you had it in a cage and you let it out, it'd just book it.
Oh, it was
Or
the.
like
I think it was
octopus.
I think it was a troll mouth salamander. I think that was the one. I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure about that one. What is that even used for? I think it's used for like water.
Yeah, purifying water. I don't know exactly. Like, does it pee out pure water, or do you just throw it in a stagnant pool of water and eventually it'll eat all the microorganisms?
Yeah, that confused me a little too. I don't know what that meant.
Like during the Syrian plague event, they talked about the troll mouth salamander like somehow producing clean water, but they never really said anything about it. So I was always confused about that as well.
Yeah.
You just pour it in this end, and it comes.
Well, that's what
I have a special orifice for
when
it.
I read that was my who is that? Who was that? Not their first thought. Are we talking about drinking their piss? I mean,
Hey,
you just hook it up to the faucet. Is
I mean,
that
let's
how
be
it
honest.
works?
Who here had that as their first thought when you read about
Well,
animals purifying water?
Yeah, that was the Suds McKenzie twice filtered?
in my first job in high school, there was an African lady who told me that it's good for you to drink your pee-pee. So
Oh God.
Oh, this
if
sterile.
it will purify the water, that's great.
Anyways,
Hey, we eat chitlins, right?
no, I don't. The only other
Completely
thing that,
different.
the only other thing that sort of caught my interest is that there was somewhere a mention of fossils and somehow playing a role in storytelling, and I'm kind of curious, like how that even would play a role in storytelling. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if there's any more detail on that or not.
There's the giants. I think they talked about the giant skeletons and Titan step, like being kind of like fossilish.
Yeah, it sounded more like a surface level component, not something where you're going to dig and dig and dig.
Yeah.
Something more like you'll go across the side of a mountain where an area has been like scarped or sheared away or whatever, and you see little like fossil bits and stuff in it. Like that's more what I would imagine seeing.
Because does that open the idea to like archaeology or something that provides something to the world?
for sure.
I'd be curious to see how it, like, what does it provide?
Yeah, definitely knowing what grew where in the past. It could just be that a certain type of fossil, it makes really potent medicine. So you're really just trying to find it for that, for all we know.
Maybe coal or something.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons that you might want to, or just purely for like, hey, I want to build a museum of things that used to live but don't anymore. Maybe some magic will exist that will allow you to resurrect dinosaurs.
It can be Ark.
Well, we are
Jurassic
starting to run
World,
towards the end here, so I don't know. Kind of packed in a whole lot all at once there. I don't know if there's anything else?
Could keep talking about this for hours, but we should probably wrap it up here.
I'm just still super. It just never crossed my mind, the idea of war goats. I mean, it will be fascinating if we are given a world in which that is possible, because that means almost anything will be possible.
The war monkeys will be much cooler, but
I'm picturing Lord of the Rings. You know, the elephants, people riding in to try to take down the walls. I mean, that just.
I'm just saying, I get it. But the war monkeys, those are going to be much cooler. Throw them at the wall, and there you go. So
I got the war goat
let's see the
idea.
monkeys against the goats.
I got the war goat idea from The Hobbit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, if you can teach the war monkeys to use the gliders, then they're really in trouble.
Right. Exactly.
Then you just launch them with catapults.
And then I'm actually, I've been one with you guys where don't make it too complex. Don't make it too complex. Getting into this, I'm sort of reversing that on the idea, though, of breeding. I would like to see some complexity in that. So with that, that's the last I have to say.
Yeah, some. I'm just saying it can't be.
I would like to see a lot.
There's a balance, because once you start going too much, it never releases, because you can add stuff all the time.
Fortunately, he's not the creative director. I don't think the creative director is necessarily looking to bog down the entire game with genetics and breeding systems. So there will definitely be a point where foot is put down. It's like, all right, enough. The system's great. Gonna roll with this, flesh it out, and move forward.
Right, you put in the word Mendelian genetics, and there better be some level. Actually, I never mentioned it. Actually, technically my degree before I went on to further was in genetics. So,
oh, very cool.
Just curious. Anyways, all right. Does anybody have anything else to say about the stream, about flora, fauna?
Actually, if that's the case, you could probably help them out as a subject matter expert. They were looking.
Maybe. It's been a while, but
Huh.
All right. Well, yeah. So I guess that will wrap up the stream. Baldrin, thank you for joining us, especially on short notice.
No problem.
Certainly, if this becomes another topic later on live stream, you're more than welcome to come back and talk with us a little bit more. So we will be back in 2 weeks. And we are, for those who are interested in Masters of Creation, I think now that Alpha 1 is starting up, we will also start back with a show for that, since we will actually have some gameplay to kind of go through. So thank you for joining us, and everyone have a good night.
Later, folks.